Welcome back to AM Agenda. With me now, Liberal MP Michael Sukkar and Labor frontbencher, the Shadow Assistant Minister for Manufacturing, Nick Champion. Gentlemen, good morning to you both. This breaking news this morning, Michael, you've been summoned, as well as the rest of the Coalition Party room at 9 a.m. A superannuation compromise, it looks like.
Well, Kieran, yes, I've been notified of a 9 o'clock meeting, so I'll be heading along to hear what the Treasurer and the Economic Portfolio Ministers have to say. Obviously, we've been consulting very closely with the Treasurer, Assistant Treasurer, Minister for Finance, and I'm very confident that we'll get a landing that the party room is happy with.
Well, my understanding is from some senior sources this morning that the backbench will be happy with it. I haven't got any of the detail at this point, unfortunately, but what I'm told is Labor will find it hard to oppose and the backbench will be happy with it.
Well, look, I'm confident that we'll have a position that we can all live with. I'll find out the detail at 9 o'clock like everybody else. I think it'll be difficult for Labor to challenge it because they don't actually have a policy and they didn't take a policy to the election. So they're on pretty shaky ground at the best of times. But I think that the consultation that the Treasurer and others have undertaken over the last few weeks will do wonders. And I think hopefully that after this party room meeting we all walk out very, very happy with the package.
Well, Nick Champion, the one thing that I do know is that there won't be any reduction in dollar terms. In net terms, it's revenue neutral, the changes. If there is, well, there obviously been some sort of compromise, but in dollar terms, the same overall savings, that would be welcomed by Labor in terms of trying to deal with budget repair.
We've been out there talking about superannuation for a long time now and about ending some of the very generous tax concessions put into it, and we did have a policy going to the election. But I guess the thing about it is this deal was always available for the government to do budget repair on superannuation concessions. It was available 2 years ago. But at first they opposed it, then they sort of came to a package. Now they've had to negotiate with their backbench, which is not a place for a government to be. I mean, normally, backbench consultation is done more in sort of, I guess more in the spirit of it rather than the actuality. I mean, what we're actually having here now is a Prime Minister and a Treasurer completely driven by Conservative backbenchers, and the reason is because the Prime Minister's leadership is very tenuous.
But how do you say that when there was, because I know this is the narrative, but the fact is,
Tony Abbott, the narrative, it's the truth.
But now Tony Abbott ruled out.
Backbenchers going to say.
Let's just get. I want to get Michael's reaction to this in a moment. But the point on super is that they went a lot further than Labor expected them to go. Morrison and Turnbull and Tony Abbott had previously ruled out changes to super.
Yeah, but it took them a long time to get there. I mean, they could have done this deal a long time ago with Labor. We had our package out there some time ago.
But on this, it's a bit rich to be saying they're being driven by the right.
I mean, but what happened was they got pushed along by events, really. So they could have done budget repair on superannuation 2 years ago. And we would have had these budget savings locked in, and people would have known and had some predictability about where superannuation policy was going. Instead, what we've had is the government dragged kicking and screaming, first opposing it, then having a package, and now having a new package which has had to be negotiated with Conservative backbenchers under the threat of a leadership issue.
Well, I mean, heaven forbid that backbenchers who represent their constituents actually get a say. And I mean, I think it says a lot about the Labor Party that Nick thinks that's an interesting proposition. But what we've tried to do here is ensure that superannuation policy is not dealt with in a piecemeal fashion like the Labor Party did. For many years, they treated super a bit like a piggy bank. Whenever they needed a hole filled, they made a small tweak here or there, always increasing taxes. What we've tried to do is ensure that a package of changes provide people the certainty that they need for their retirement income, but we do not want to encourage people to use it as a tax planning vehicle. And I'm very confident that after this party room meeting, that we'll have a position that banks all of the savings that we took to the election and is consistent with those two principles.
Well, what about the other element to this, where that elements of your base have kicked up a stink about the changes? Do you think that this will placate the base as well?
Well, I'm not sure I'd characterise it as our base. There will absolutely be people who will be paying more tax, particularly very, very high income earners after these changes are made. Now, whether they'll be happy or not, I'm not sure, but I think they'll understand that we cannot allow our superannuation system to be used as a tax planning vehicle. And ultimately, I think where we will land is a position that everybody can live with.
And if you look at this in the context of the savings, omnibus savings this week, this would be another $6 billion plus saving. This is a few runs on the board now for the Prime Minister, who has been derided as not making any progress over the last year.
Well, I guess the omnibus bill, they needed the Labor Party to do it, and they entered into negotiations, serious negotiations.
That's good. That's a good
That's
thing.
right, and a little bit of bipartisanship on these areas is good. It's good to have a deal go through the Parliament where we do budget repair, which is fair to the community, and that's what the community wants us to do. But the deal on super they could have had years ago,
All right.
and they should have locked it away.
Let's look at the issue of, well, there's a few issues I want to get to. Hanson and the same-sex marriage plebiscite. First of all, Hanson. John Howard warns not to marginalise her, otherwise you play into her, her political goals. The Greens stood up and walked out. What did you make of that yesterday and the broader reaction to the speech?
Well, I don't think the response to the speech should be street theatre. I don't think that really, I don't think the Greens really added anything to it. They knew what was coming. They went in there, did their stunt and walked out. And I just don't. I think that sort of street theatre doesn't help the cause, and particularly when they did a deal with the government on the Senate voting rules, which allowed this outcome. You've got to question, I guess, their sincerity about the whole thing. But I wouldn't agree with Mr. Howard. We have to treat Senator Hanson with kid gloves, and we have to sort of genuflect to her views. Her views are, they're boring. I mean, that's the first thing. Largely what we got is a speech which got the Tipex out, rubbed out Asians and blackfellas and put in Muslims. I mean, that's what happened here. She's just changed the groups which she's outraged and making these allegations about. So it's pretty boring. It's page 15 of the advertiser.
Regardless of what you think about her views, and she did receive 5% of the vote, it was an average speech. And the shame, I think, was that it distracted from really tremendous maiden addresses like Julian Leeser in the lower house, the member for Barara, who gave a very heartfelt, thoughtful speech on mental health, reflecting on his father's suicide 20 years ago. That was quite an incredible maiden speech from him.
It is a real shame that that Pauline Hanson's speech has taken the headline, so to speak. I was in the chamber for Julian Leeser's speech, and I think you were as well, Nick. And I mean, it was the most powerful moment that I can ever recall in the chamber. I mean, there are moments when you can hear a pin drop in the House, and that speech took it to the next level. Just speaking about his experiences with his father's suicide, and
yet we're distracted by what was an average speech, depending on whether the merits of the arguments. Obviously, the substance of it we will discuss. But anyway, I think I agree with you 100% that sadly there's not more focus on that very worthy.
The other important thing about Julian's speech. Sure, it had this very personal thing in it, but it also had thoughtful conservatism in it, and he had a lot to say about federation. Now, I kind of disagree with some of what he said, and I agree with some of what he said about federation. But the important thing is, well, he's thinking about things, being thoughtful. He's got the qualifications to actually be in Parliament.
Let's hear Michael on the substance of what Hanson said. Though.
Well, can I just say that I do also agree with Nick on the street theatre point. I mean, I speak to Liberal and Labor senators who say they sit through the most fanatical speeches from the Greens that you can think of. So it's quite rich for them to be making this huge statement. But look, I think my position on Pauline Hanson is, the reality is she is a political opponent of the government, like every other party in the Parliament is a political opponent. That is how we view her. And I would agree, and I'd echo the comments of former Prime Minister John Howard. I don't think we should be incessantly talking about and dissecting every aspect of her speech. I'm not sure there is a great level of intellectual rigour that sits below it. Having said that, I wouldn't denounce Pauline Hanson like some try to do by saying, well, she's bigoted, therefore nothing she ever says has any resonance anywhere, anytime. I think that kind of approach isn't useful because you're right. Many thousands of Australians did vote for her or for the One Nation Party. So, look, we have to give them due respect, but I don't think we should be unduly focusing on it.
Can I just wrap up with the issue of the same-sex marriage plebiscite. It's quite a big gamble here for the Greens and Labor, because if it is blocked and February 11 comes and goes, and the chance to vote for it comes and goes, and then Turnbull wins the next election, because as far possibly, it's not no guarantee at the moment. Probably, you know, it's looking like a challenge, but he could win the next election. And then you're talking about 3, 5, 6 years.
Well, I think there are two important principles here. First of all, the principle of parliamentary democracy. We don't outsource any of these other issues that are difficult for the parliament, you know, to the people. And if you want to go down the route of having citizen-initiated referendum or parliamentary-initiated referendum to solve every difficult problem that the government or the opposition or the parliament has, well, then we'll end up in the same sort of state that California's in.
This has been voted on many times.
So parliamentary democracy is important, and having a conscience vote is the absolutely appropriate way of dealing with it. I suppose the second point of it is I can tell you from the local community, we're not having people rush up to us and say, I want a plebiscite. Most people regard it, when you talk to them about it, most people regard it as a waste of money, and you know, if they do have strong views on the issue, they want their parliamentarian to hear them, digest them. They don't necessarily expect us to agree with them.
The problem is,
they just
before
want
I
to be
go to
heard.
Michael on this, the problem with Labor and the Greens' position on this is that it's fine you're having this argument, but it doesn't happen in a vacuum away from the political reality. And the political reality, as you well know, is that Malcolm Turnbull agreed as part of the overall party room arrangement. He knows he's got a party that's got different views. Labor's not having this argument on its own. You've got a Prime Minister who can't change his position.
People have a clear choice at the next election. If they want parliamentary democracy and respect for the Westminster system and progressive social reform, then vote Labor. If you want, you know, this sort of chaos that we're getting on every single issue, you have to have a party room and this sort of cobbled together compromise, vote Liberal.
Well, I mean, we did take it to the election. The electorate has spoken loudly. You know, we've been very, very unequivocal on our position with this. I have seldom seen our party room as united on an issue, whether you're talking about Conservatives or moderates or those who are in between. We are so united on this. And I think, speaking about the community, I think there's a sense of fatigue in the community. This has been spoken about for a very long time. The prospect that this could be debated and argued for another 3 or 6 or 9 years, I think makes a lot of people out there feel as though a plebiscite, which will have on February 11 a drop-dead date where we have a decision that everybody will be able to live with, a prospect that they're very enthusiastic about. And the test now is for Bill Shorten and Labor. Are they going to be hijacked by the hard left of their party? The fanatical left of the Labor Party.
Well, I'm not hard left.
No, Nick, you're not, but there are...
And I don't think there's a very good idea.
There are many others who are pushing very, very hard to subvert the will of the people, because we were very, very clear. And that, you know, they bailed the cat. They bailed the cat a couple of weeks ago when they said, we don't support a plebiscite because we're not convinced that the Australian people will come up with the answer that we believe is correct. I mean, that is an absolute indictment on their position.
Why don't we have a referenda to solve all the government's problems? They've got a problem on super. We could have a plebiscite on that.
We've had parliamentary votes.
We've got problems in the government over the leadership. We could have a plebiscite, Abbott versus Turnbull. You could solve it by plebiscite.
You participated
we could have we could have sort of a runoff primary for the leadership of the government.
Well, time, gents, unfortunately. Thank you, Nick Champion and
thanks, Kieran.
Michael Sukkar. Appreciate that. A quick break. Stay with us here on AM Agenda.